7 days. That's all it took for Bruce Lee to remove a 300-pound obstacle without breaking a rule. A barrier that once stood unmoving vanished, not because the hallway changed, but because resistance did. What shifted wasn't space or authority, only the cost of standing in his way. The prison did not announce itself with violence. It revealed itself through repetition. Doors opened at the same hours each day. Lines formed without instruction. Voices stayed low, not from fear, but from habit. The place functioned because everyone understood what was tolerated and what was not, even when nothing was written down. New arrivals learned this quickly. Some resisted it. Most adjusted. Inside these walls, size mattered, but only up to a point. Reputation mattered more. Not the kind built through noise or intimidation, but the kind that settled quietly, confirmed over time by how a man moved through shared spaces, who waited, who did not, who yielded without being asked. This was the environment that received Bruce Lee. Those who recognized the name expected spectacle. They were disappointed. There was no display, no posture meant for attention. He carried himself the way someone does when they are already oriented, upright, economical, neither hurried nor cautious. He observed first, always. Witnesses later said that what stood out was not his confidence, but his restraint. In a place where new inmates often tried to establish boundaries immediately, he did not. He followed procedure. He learned the rhythms. He noted where people slowed their steps and where they did not. Which corners created congestion? Which corridors functioned as informal checkpoints? The prison measured men constantly, but never directly. It watched how they adapted. Some attempted to dominate space. They widened their stance in doorways, lingered where others passed, spoke just loudly enough to invite response. This behavior was not punished. It was expected. It was how the hierarchy refreshed itself. Others chose invisibility. They kept to walls, eyes down, movements abbreviated. They survived, but they were never left alone. Submission here did not buy safety. It only delayed attention. Bruce Lee did neither. He moved as if the space belonged to no one, and therefore required no permission. He did not rush corridors, but he did not yield them either. When paths narrowed, he adjusted his angle rather than his speed. When conversation stalled movement, he waited without impatience, as though time itself was not a scarce resource. This was noticed, not because it challenged anyone, but because it failed to reinforce existing expectations. In an environment calibrated to detect weakness or provocation, neutrality was unusual. It forced others to decide how to interpret it. Guards observed him the way they observed all new arrivals, briefly, then less so. Inmates observed him longer. They spoke about him quietly, not with admiration, but curiosity. Curiosity in prison is rarely benign. It looks for confirmation. By the end of the first day, Bruce Lee understood the terrain. By the end of the second, the terrain had begun to take note of him. The corridors, unchanged in structure, had started to feel narrower. The man chose a corridor that mattered. It was not the largest passage, nor the most crowded, but it served a purpose beyond transit. It connected work detail to housing, funneling movement at predictable hours. Everyone passed through it. Everyone understood its informal ownership. He positioned himself there without ceremony. 300 pounds by most estimates. Broad shoulders, relaxed posture, arms loose at his sides. He did not lean. He did not threaten. He simply occupied the space in a way that forced a decision from anyone approaching. To pass, one would need acknowledgement. Permission implied, never requested. This was how challenges were issued here. When Bruce Lee approached, the corridor was already functioning as intended. Two men ahead of him slowed, adjusted their route, and slipped past the wall. No words exchanged. The system worked. Bruce Lee did not slow. He did not accelerate either. His pace remained unchanged, measured, as if the man ahead were no more significant than the cinder-block walls. Those watching noticed this immediately. Consistency in that moment was not neutral. It was a statement. The larger man turned slightly, enough to be seen, not enough to be aggressive. His eyes met Lee's, then drifted away. This, too, was deliberate. It invited retreat without demanding it. A graceful exit was being offered. Bruce Lee stopped, not abruptly, just enough to respect distance. His posture remained upright, shoulders relaxed, hands visible. He did not square himself. He did not shift his weight in preparation. There was no sign he intended to contest anything. Silence stretched. In this environment, silence was rarely empty. It carried meaning, expectation, pressure. The corridor behind Lee began to fill. Movement slowed elsewhere as attention redirected itself. Guards remained where they were. This was not their moment. The larger man spoke first, not with words, but with stillness. He did not move aside. He did not escalate. He simply waited. Bruce Lee waited as well. Those who later described the moment struggled to explain why it felt unbalanced. By all visible measures, the outcome seemed predetermined. Size favored one man overwhelmingly. Position favored him too. And yet there was an absence. No tension in Lee's body, no impatience in his expression. It was not defiance. It was assessment. After several seconds, the larger man shifted his stance slightly, widening it. A subtle reminder of mass, of gravity, a recalibration. This was the point where most encounters resolved themselves. Bruce Lee adjusted his angle by a few degrees, not away, not forward, just enough to change the geometry of the space between them. It was a small movement, easy to miss. Those who noticed it felt something settle in their chest, though they could not yet name it. The challenge had been issued, the response had not yet arrived, and the corridor remained blocked. What followed was not confrontation, but suspension. Time inside does not move evenly. It stretches around moments like this, bending under attention. The corridor filled, then stopped filling. Men found reasons to linger. No one spoke loudly. No one needed to. The larger inmate had expected a reaction by now, compliance, irritation, or retreat. Each would have confirmed his position. Instead, he was met with something less familiar. Calm persistence without explanation. Bruce Lee's gaze was not fixed on the man's face. It rested lower, somewhere near the center line of the body, as if the whole structure were being read at once. His breathing remained steady. No visible tightening. No shift into readiness that others could recognize. This unsettled the rhythm. In prison, certainty is currency. When it falters, even briefly, others sense it. The watching eyes were no longer weighing who would win. They were waiting to see what kind of response would emerge. Noise or silence, force or adjustment. The larger man rolled his shoulders once, a habitual release. He exhaled sharply through his nose. Small signs, easily dismissed, but they marked the first expenditure of energy. He had begun reacting. Bruce Lee had not. The space between them remained unchanged, but the balance within it was not. The crowd felt it before they understood it. This was no longer about passage through a corridor. It had become a question of control. Specifically, who needed to prove it? A guard glanced over, then away. Nothing illegal was happening. No hands were raised. No voices escalated. Intervention would have broken the unspoken contract of the place. This would resolve itself one way or another. The larger man shifted again, this time stepping forward just enough to compress the distance. It was meant to reassert presence, to force a response. Most men, at this point, would have backed away or braced themselves. Bruce Lee stepped as well, not backward, not forward. He stepped slightly inside the angle of the man's stance, close enough to change the dynamic without touching him. The movement was smooth, almost incidental. To the untrained eye, it looked like nothing. To those watching closely, it was everything. The corridor had gone completely still. No one moved now, not because they feared violence, but because they sensed its irrelevance. Whatever was about to happen would not resemble the encounters they were used to recounting. The larger man's breathing had changed, deeper, slower, but heavier. His eyes narrowed, not in anger but concentration. He was no longer testing. He was trying to understand. Bruce Lee remained composed, as though the answer were already clear. And in that quiet, the question finally reached its limit. Those closest later disagreed on exactly what they saw. Some said Bruce Lee moved first. Others insisted the larger man initiated it. The truth, as it often is in moments like this, sat somewhere quieter, between intention and result. There was no strike, no winding motion, no preparatory shift that signaled violence. The demonstration, if it could be called that, lasted less than a breath and produced almost no sound. Bruce Lee stepped fully into the space the man believed he controlled. At the same time, his hand made contact, not with force but with precision, not high, not dramatic, low, centered, brief. The point was not pain, it was structure. Witnesses remember the effect more clearly than the action. The larger man's posture failed him, not catastrophically, not in a way that invited spectacle. His knees bent slightly, involuntarily. His weight redistributed forward, and then had nowhere to settle. For a fraction of a second, his size worked against him, amplifying the imbalance rather than correcting it. Bruce Lee did not push. He did not follow. He simply withdrew his hand and stepped past. The man reached out instinctively, not to strike but to steady himself. His fingers brushed fabric that was no longer there. He took one step back, then another, until his spine met the wall he had been using as leverage minutes earlier. No one laughed. No one spoke. The corridor, which moments ago had felt narrow and contested, reopened without announcement. Bruce Lee walked through it at the same pace he had approached, unhurried, unaltered. He did not look back. The larger man remained where he was, breathing hard now, eyes unfocused. There was no injury to display, no clear explanation to offer, only the undeniable fact that something fundamental had shifted without effort. Those watching felt an unfamiliar conclusion settled in. This had not been dominance asserted through aggression. It had been resolution through understanding, the kind that leaves no argument standing. A guard finally looked over, scanning the scene for aftermath. Finding none, he returned his attention elsewhere. Order had not been disrupted. If anything, it had been clarified. By the time movement resumed, Bruce Lee was already gone, and the corridor no longer belonged to anyone. The larger man did not pursue. That absence was noticed first. In this environment, challenges often demanded a response after the fact, a shove later in the day, a confrontation when witnesses were fewer. None came. The man stayed where he was for a moment longer than necessary, then moved aside and let the flow return. He avoided the corridor for the rest of the day. Those who knew him understood the significance of that choice. It was not fear, it was recalibration. His strength had not been taken from him, but it had been rendered insufficient, and that distinction mattered. There was no opponent to target, no insult to avenge. What had occurred did not leave a bruise that could justify retaliation. It left uncertainty. Over the next days, his posture changed in subtle ways. He no longer occupied doorways. He no longer lingered where traffic slowed. When paths narrowed, he adjusted first, not dramatically, quietly, as if correcting a miscalculation he had not known he'd made. No one mocked him. They didn't need to. His previous authority had relied on predictability, on the assumption that size translated cleanly into control. That assumption had dissolved, and with it, the language he had used to navigate the hierarchy. Bruce Lee did not acknowledge the shift. He continued moving through the prison as before. Same pace, same awareness, same economy. He did not collect attention or avoid it. He offered no follow-up demonstration, no reinforcement. The lesson, once delivered, did not require repetition. This restraint gave the incident its weight. Stories circulated, but they were inconsistent. Details changed. Some exaggerated, others minimized. What remained constant was the outcome. A moment when resistance ceased without escalation. A moment when force was present, but unnecessary. Men who heard the story did not ask how it was done. They asked when, where, how long it took. The answers unsettled them because the implication was clear. If strength could be neutralized without struggle, then posturing was no longer protection. Noise was no longer leverage. One had to consider balance, timing, awareness, things not easily displayed or challenged. The larger man was still respected, but differently now, as someone who had reached the limit of one method and survived the discovery of another. And Bruce Lee became something else entirely. Not a threat. A reference point. The kind that quietly rearranges a system without ever claiming credit for it. The prison changed occupants, not structure. Men were transferred. Sentences ended. New hierarchies formed and dissolved, yet the corridor remained the same. Its walls scuffed, its corners familiar, its function unchanged. And still, the incident was remembered, not often, and never loudly. It surfaced in fragments, usually when a newcomer tested space too confidently, or when someone mistook size for inevitability. An older inmate might say, quietly, "There was a man once," and leave it there, no names, no embellishment. The listener would understand enough. What endured was not the image of a confrontation, but the absence of one. Years later, the larger man spoke of it only once, according to those who knew him afterward. He did not describe the movement or the contact. He described the realization, the moment when effort became irrelevant, when strength failed to produce outcome. He said it taught him more than any victory he had claimed before. Bruce Lee was gone by then, long removed from that place, his life carrying forward into other arenas where his discipline would be tested in different ways. But inside the prison, his presence remained oddly intact, not as memory of dominance, but of clarity. Guards, too, remembered, not as an incident, but as an example of order resolving itself. No paperwork, no intervention. A system correcting its own misunderstanding. The corridor was never claimed again. Men still passed through it. Some slowed, some didn't. But no one stood there, expecting the space to obey them. The lesson had settled into the architecture, quiet and unchallenged. What happened that day did not elevate one man above others. It adjusted the measure by which all men were weighed. And that is how it became legend, not through repetition, but through restraint, through a single moment, witnessed, then left undisturbed, allowed to age into understanding. Those who speak of it now do so briefly, then they fall silent, as if saying more would only weaken what was already complete.